Welcome back to this week's episode of the State of Recruiting, your weekly Horns 24/7 recruiting podcast. I'm Mike Roach, and I'm joined as always by Nick Harris. We've got a big show for you today, but before we get into it, Nick, how's it going?
It's going pretty good. You got caught mid drinking water as soon as we
I
put
know.
it live.
Well, these March allergies are starting to hit,
Same.
So as we sit down, I find myself coughing and all sorts of things. So
Yeah, same.
it probably won't be the last time you see me take a drink of water on this particular broadcast, but it's been just trying to get through it. Well, let's jump right into it. It's not a huge week for recruiting news, but the top 247 for the 2023 class got a big facelift this week, with a lot of new names being put in, a lot of names moving around, and I guess probably the biggest bulletin for Texas is Arch Manning remaining the number one player in the country. We've talked a lot about Arch Manning on this podcast. We've talked about him a lot on the website. Not only would Arch Manning represent, a very talented arm in the quarterback room and a way to keep that talent pipeline going there, but I think, he obviously could be the cornerstone for a phenomenal class. I think when you look at how classes are built, a lot of them are built around the quarterback and guys that want to play with the quarterback. And, throughout our time covering Arch, we've heard a lot of other kids talk about being able to play with him. And so with him remaining at number one, I think it's great to have a five-star quarterback to build around. I think it's even better when that guy's the number one player in the country. And so, my first thoughts off the bat from seeing this ranking is if Texas can get Arch Manning and we anticipate maybe a spring or summer decision, I just have a hard time seeing him go into his season uncommitted. I think that it could really lead to something special in this group.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of recruits that gravitate towards Arch Manning, and Arch has done a pretty good job behind the scenes building relationships with different recruits, whether that be Reuben Owens, Jonte Cook, Anthony Hill, and even more so recently, Jonah Wilson, and a few other recruits across the country. So he's definitely doing his homework on guys he potentially wants to play with, but so are those guys. Wherever he commits, there's going to be a lot of people wanting to jump on board and join his class. If Texas is lucky enough to have that problem, then that's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out. But just having that talent to start a 2023 class going into the fall, it could be huge for Texas, especially like you said, keeping the talent going in that quarterback room. It would be huge for the development of that room. But also it would solidify recruitments that Texas is already doing a pretty good job in. It would more than help with Reuben Owens. It would more than help with Jonte Cook. And it would more than help with guys that, just to bring back in the picture. You look at guys like Braylon James, who, have kind of extended their recruitments. And talking to Braylon a couple weeks ago, he said he's kind of waiting to see how some classes shake out. So, that's one where if Arch Manning jumps in, Braylon James all of a sudden becomes a big target or a big option for Texas again. So, and he's probably not the only one. Having him in a class will almost guarantee a top 3 class, if not a number 1 class.
Yeah, I think looking at kind of the list too, you talk about maybe the guys you could get back in on. Like, I know you talked to Ryan Niblett recently, and he indicated that he made a mistake leaving Texas out of his top 7, but I don't think he would have left them out if they were higher on his pecking order. I don't think that mistake would have been made. So obviously there's ground to make up there. When you look at a guy like Jaylen Brown from Miami, who's coming in possibly for a visit next week, one of the more electric wide receivers in the entire country. Jaquez Petaway, who I think Texas is doing a good job with, but maybe that's something that could kind of put them over the top for it. And then, I think you got to find somebody on the defensive side too. And I think that a guy like Anthony Hill is not necessarily going to make his decision based on Arch Manning, but it could help. And if you get Anthony Hill, he could have a similar type of effect with defensive recruits in the class.
Yeah, absolutely. You bring Anthony Hill on board, then you start looking at guys like David Hicks and Javian Taviano, where Texas might be having to do a little bit of work in both of those recruitments. Hicks more so than Taviano, but nevertheless, it would help with those bona fide top tier guys on the defensive side of the ball that they need to bring in. But I guess I guess the bright side of that is I feel like the defensive class is going to shake out, quite nicely regardless. But having Arch Manning in the class will for sure help, and it could even help bring in that class national. We've talked about the safety picture and the fact that they're going to have to go national for some safeties. They're looking at Makari Vickers out of Florida. They're looking at Derek Williams out of Louisiana and some others across the country. So having a guy like Arch Manning to be able to recruit for you, after being committed, that could really help, solidify that safety picture and just the DB picture as a whole.
Couple of numbers for you just from looking at this, and I broke this down yesterday on the site. Um, there are in-state 38 prospects on the list, which falls only behind Florida with 49, which looks like a strong year in Florida. Not a surprise to see those two at the top of the list. They typically are. Georgia, 27. Georgia's becoming one of the strongest talent producers in the country. Alabama with a really good year with 15 kids. Louisiana with 11. The surprising one is California with only 19. 19 names listed, and we've heard a lot from our guys out west that it's kind of a down year in California, and those numbers seem to bear that out. If you want to look by position, defensive line really strong with 37 guys. Wide receiver 27, defensive backs between both corners and safeties 46 in the top 247, and there's 23 edge rushers. Offensive line and linebacker look like the positions of weakness. There were 15 quarterbacks, 13 running backs, and 14 tight ends listed. And then when you want to look at kind of how for Texas the top 247 played out, it's top heavy. 28 targets of, I think there were 35 total, basically, that Texas has offered. In that group, we're in the top 100. Not 35, I'm sorry, 45. And just 17 are in the back half. So really top heavy, top 100 guys. When you look at Jaquez Petaway and Jalen Brown, Javian Taviano, Derek Williams, Shante Cook, DeAndre Moore, those guys are all top 50 guys in the country. So really a good chance to put a solid start to this class and really collect some high-end talent.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just going to come down to bringing in those guys and locking them down. I mean, granted, Texas finished off really strong at the end of the 2022 cycle and bringing in Kelvin Banks and Devon Campbell. But I think we could all tell you that it didn't go the way they planned, probably particularly on the defensive side of the ball. So it's going to come down to securing that top end talent, before signing day or, before 2 weeks out, just so you can build that class, have that momentum, and be able to bring guys along with, 5 stars already in or high 4s already in. It just helps build that class a lot steadier. But we'll kind of see how it shakes out down the line.
Well, to build that class, you've got to do all the recruiting stuff, and the big part of the recruiting stuff is visits. And the dead period opened earlier this week. Texas had a couple of visitors on campus. They'll have a couple this weekend. Could have a couple on Monday. But the big weekends they're really pointing to, like March 26th, when spring practices really get going, they want to host a group of targets there. We expect Arch Manning to be along at that point. And most of their big name targets. And then it sounds like they're also putting something together for the first weekend of April as well. So I think, when you look at these, this is really the opportunity to kind of set the table with those guys. Maybe you get Javian Taviano back, who had a really good junior day experience and is probably talking higher about Texas than he has since, the beginning of his recruitment. And you build on that momentum with that March visit, then you get him back for a spring visit, and maybe you can close the deal. I think that's what's going to be most important. There are a bunch of names that we do know have expressed interest in coming. I believe DeAndre Moore, I know, said he's going to come in the summer. I know you talked to Niblet. I'm not sure what he said about a visit. But we know that there's going to be a lot of guys coming those weekends, and the intent is to kind of set the table and get them back for the summer for officials.
Yeah, you mentioned Javian Taviano. Talked to him a couple of weeks ago, and he admitted that Texas was kind of slipping in his recruitment before that junior day experience, and it put Texas right back among the contenders. Texas has always been in that race, but we had kind of felt that maybe they were slipping in the late fall, and I feel like our indications were definitely correct. And but Texas was able to get him on campus on junior day. He had a great experience, and getting him back during the spring, like you said, would be huge. Looking at some other guys, Ryan Niblett hasn't really taken any visits at all. I think the only visit he's been on was to U of H during the season. So he's going to get out and see a lot of places this spring and summer. Texas will most likely be one of them. Jaquez Petaway, he's going to try to get out to a visit this spring. He's someone else who hasn't really been on a ton of visits so far, but he has been to one at Texas last June. So we'll see if he can get back and, if that receiver picture can start shaking out a little bit. Trying to think of some other guys. I mean, with Arch Manning coming in that March 24th to 26th weekend, whatever that date is, that's going to attract a lot of guys just with that alone. Wouldn't surprise me to see Reuben Owens pop up that weekend, potentially Jonte Cook, and potentially Jonah Wilson. That's another one that Arch Manning has been able to build a connection with recently. Big body wide receiver out of Spring Decaney, who Texas offered during the evaluations period in January. So that's another one to watch closely moving forward.
Yeah, I will say before we sat down to record this, I posted a story with Jonah Wilson on our site, and he did confirm he would be there that weekend. So definitely can add him to the list. Here's where I think Texas can really make the jump is if you can kind of string those along. It'll be interesting to see which guys come to those May, April visits, come back for the spring game, and then come back in the summer. I think when you start doing that and you can start stringing those visits along, you start to become a serious player for a team or for a kid. And I think that's the case. One position I know everybody's hot about is linebacker. And I will say that while linebacker may be down a little bit nationally, it's probably on the stronger end in the state of Texas. And, last year, I think Texas had to go out of state a lot for their linebacker targets when you looked at the guys they were recruiting. This year, I don't think that's necessarily a problem. They've got Anthony Hill, obviously, in state. They've got Samaje Burrell from North Crowley is another guy that they love, and I think he'll be up there in March, by the way. Darian Gullett from Marlin, who I think they see as an inside or outside guy. So there are some really strong options along with a couple of the national guys they're in on, like Leona Lifau and Leviticus Sua from Modern Day. I think that it's obviously an important year, I would say, probably for wide receiver and linebacker based on what they didn't get last year. And those are names I can see, really being factors later down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. Having back-to-back classes where the state of Texas has the number one linebacker in the country with Harold Perkins last year and then Anthony Hill this year, Texas has got to grab one of them, just to kind of, save face at the linebacker position. Anthony Hill is definitely attainable moving forward. And he's going to have Texas among his contenders moving forward. But also looking down the list, like you said, you mentioned Samaje Burrell. That's another one that Texas is doing a really good job with right now. Leona Lifau, maybe Texas is kind of on the outside looking in as far as contenders, but they definitely could sneak in and grab an official visit moving forward. Tassili Akana, kind of seen as an edge, but could also be a backer at the same time. That's another one that Texas is still very much in on. I'd be surprised if he doesn't make a off-season visit to Texas. You mentioned another one, Darian Gullett. That's one that's just been rising up the rankings that we've been a big fan of, since his electric junior season. So as long as Texas, continues to develop relationships with these linebacker targets, I think Jeff Choate can bring a couple in.
Nick, I've been asked, quite frankly, a lot of times about what's going on with Reuben Owens. I know that he hasn't been back to Austin for a bit, and that's got some people worried. I know you've given an update on him since last time you talked to him, but kind of just set the table on where things are with Reuben Owens.
Yeah, for sure. Reuben Owens is coming off a huge junior season in which he almost rushed for 3,000 yards and 50 touchdowns. It was a season that put him, as a consensus 5-star across almost all recruiting service rankings. And he jumped up to number 18 in the 247 rankings this week, which is the highest he's ever been. He solidified that number one running back spot in the country. And in my opinion, he is the number one running back in the country. And as a result, a lot more teams are starting to get heavily involved. It's not just Texas in this race anymore. Not that it was to begin with, but you got Georgia, who has been making a strong push since almost day one. He's made multiple visits to Athens, including for their junior day back in January, where he had a really good experience meeting with running back coach Del McGee, head coach Kirby Smart. They're doing everything to kind of make him one of their number one priorities alongside Arch Manning. in that 2023 class. It's going to be a huge battle, I think, for both of those guys with Georgia, which is something kind of interesting, just considering that Texas is doing a lot of recruiting in the state of Georgia now with Tashard Choice on staff. But going back to Reuben Owens, he will return to Texas this spring. I am confident in that. But he's been to Texas so many times that he's going to be kind of looking around just to see other places before he potentially returns to Texas. Or I just don't be if you're a Texas fan, just don't be concerned if he's taking a ton of visits and hasn't returned to Texas in a while. Texas is going to be among the contenders in that race. They're going to be a hat on the table on the final day that he makes his commitment. And as I see it right now, Texas is still number one in that race, with Georgia probably number two. Texas A&M has obviously been doing a really good job too. I'd probably put them at number three. Their offensive line class that they brought in the 2021 class was huge for Reuben Owens, but he wants to see if those guys maybe stick around on campus, or if they're probably on the outs by the time he would get a starting job at Texas A&M. But also, he's been building a solid relationship with Jimbo Fisher. It's a place that the family loves. It's a place that his hometown of El Campo loves. And as his recruitment starts to shake out and he starts to go to more places, I feel like he's going to stay in the state of Texas. And if he does, that more than benefits Texas. And I would see Texas winning out in that equation. But if he were to choose to go out of state, then Georgia would definitely be a solid contender. You also have USC in the race, which I feel like is a dark horse in this recruitment. He was able to meet Malachi Nelson a couple of weeks ago at the Houston Shock Doctor tournament and got to get well acquainted with him. Got to see how he throws the ball and operates an offense, and he really liked what he saw. USC was already in that race before Lincoln Riley came into the picture. And now that Lincoln Riley is in the picture, they're making him a big priority. They're going to get him out for potentially an official here in this offseason. So that's going to be another recruitment, another school to watch in this recruitment. But all in all, Texas is going to be in the thick of it, through the end. His relationship that he's built with Tashard Choice, going back to his days at Georgia Tech, has been really strong. His relationship with Brandon Harris continues to be strong. Steve Sarkisian continues to be strong. There's not much negative you could say about where Texas is in this recruitment. They're just going to have to continue to weather the storm and fight off these contenders. But it's definitely a winnable recruitment moving forward.
Absolutely. All right, let's kind of in the next couple of weeks, I think we're going to kind of look at some position by position breakdowns of this class and this team and how things go. And I think today we want to kind of start with, we know how quarterback's going to go. It's kind of Arch Manning or bust, right? We kind of have an idea on running back with Reuben Owens and probably another guy. What probably is the most intriguing spot offensively is the wide receiver group. Brendan Marion has a lot to prove. He's got a lot to kind of pick up in this class, guys they missed out on in last class, and that playmaking ability that Sark needs in the offense. And there's a lot to choose from. I think this is one of the stronger wide receiver years I've ever covered, both in state and nationally. And when you look at kind of the way it breaks down, I think there's a group of guys both in state and out of state. If you want to look at just the in-state guys, I think that the main targets you're looking at right now are Jonte Cook, who is top of the board for Texas. Jaquez Petaway, who's right there. Those guys are maybe, your smaller, faster guys. I think they're looking at some bigger guys like Jonah Wilson, who we mentioned earlier, and Jaden Greathouse. And Jalen Hale, I think, could also fit in there. And then, of course, Ryan Niblett's in the picture. Kyle Parker's in the picture. There's a lot for Texas to choose from. And that's not to mention the out-of-state guys they have, like DeAndre Moore and Jalen Brown and some guys like that. So, Nick, kind of how do you see it? What do you – I guess my question would be, what do you see as the most likely class that's put together?
I think likely they take a lot of numbers at this position. Just kind of looking at only taking two in the class of 2022 with Brendan Thompson and Savion Red, they're going to have to bulk up at the wide receiver position in this class, and it's a really good class to have to bulk up. It's a good problem to have. The battle will be Brendan Marion getting his targets at this point. But looking at the most likely class, I mean, let's see. Are we looking at potentially 5?
I would say 4 is the minimum number. So I think they could take 5 if there's a special, we've got 4, but Jaquez Petaway wants in. Yeah. I think they could take 5 at that point.
Absolutely. I mean, an ideal class. Let's do the ideal class. bringing in Jonte Cook and Jaquez Petaway, having both of those guys in the class would be, awesome. Maybe if one of them doesn't come in, you replace one of them with Jalen Brown, which would be a fantastic replacement. Looking at a big body target, you would love to get back in with Braylon James, but realistically, that doesn't happen. Then Jaden Greathouse is still a fantastic option. You also have Jonah Wilson, which is a fantastic option. But Kyle Parker is another one that you could throw into the mix. You know more about the Kyle Parker recruitment, but just kind of how a lot of these more smaller targets with more of a emphasis on speed. There's a lot of those guys that have been offered in the class. Kyle Parker definitely fits that mold. How many do they possibly take there? Do they only really take one big body guy?
Yeah, I think you could see him taking two, depending on if that second guy has the big body and the vertical ability to kind of do both. And so to me, I think Texas is much higher on Jaden Greathouse than a lot of people. I think part of that is him being a Westlake kid, but I think that Greathouse, while he doesn't strike you as the traditional wide receiver. Like we've kind of thought he was a tight end at times and other things. I think Texas just sees him as a weapon and
Yeah.
and more than anything, a winner. Say what you want about Jaden Greathouse's athletic speed, ability, whatever. He put on a show in the playoffs, and most specifically in the state title game against what I would call at the time the best secondary in the state of Texas at Geyer, with four legitimate D1 guys playing in that secondary, and had no problem going deep on them over and over. So I definitely think Greathouse is not just a name for them. I think that's a priority for Texas to keep a player like that, because even if you're not exactly sure on what he can be, the worst scenario for Texas would be to let a Westlake kid go elsewhere like that and just destroy college football. And then all of a sudden it's, well, we lost another one and it was a Westlake kid. And he was this good in high school. You kind of knew how good he was at that point. So I think he's a major target for them. I think they love him. And so to me, even though he's not a guy that's going to burn up the track or kill testing numbers, he is a big body that shows on film that he can push defenses vertically.
And he's a versatile big body. He can line up inside, outside. He has a lot of routes in his route running bag, a lot of route concepts. Like you said, he's just a weapon at the end of the day, and it's a weapon that Brendan Marion would love to play with, as well as Steve Sarkisian. We'll see how that one shakes out. I see Texas in a really good spot right there. Notre Dame is a school that's starting to do some really good work there. I'm curious to see if he returns to Oklahoma on a visit here soon with that new staff there. That was a school that he had liked before Lincoln Riley had departed for USC. So that'll be one to watch. Looking at the other big body target that I think Texas could, really be in for is Jonah Wilson. Ohio State is in that picture. LSU is in that picture. They're going to have to fight off some big name schools, but I think it'll come down to Texas potentially prioritizing him more than anybody else. He's potentially a third or fourth option for those, big major programs. He could be a first or second option for Texas as far as a big body guy. And I think that could definitely win him over and get Jonah Wilson to Texas. So that's one to definitely watch closely as well.
Just talking to him yesterday when I was getting some stuff for the story, I really got a great feeling on where Texas stands there. I think they're probably pushing the hardest. And Jonah Wilson's a guy that you and I saw a couple of years ago while we were sitting in the press box at AT&T, I think, watching the state championships when small school state was divided.
Yep.
And you were watching a game on Texan Live on your laptop, and we saw him. Was it against Bridgeland, maybe?
It was, in that overtime loss against Bridgeland.
Yeah, and he really pushed Bridgeland to the limit in that game. I know some people on the Texas staff think he's got some freakish ability when you look at what he can do on the basketball court and kind of just how he maneuvers his body. You and I have seen him a lot. I think it's a question of putting it all together and just being more consistent with things. But there's no doubt he's a kind of an athletic marvel.
Yeah, absolutely. He's he's had problems with drops in the past when I've seen him in person, but he's really worked on that. He's gotten better at that. He's still going to be a developmental project getting to the next level. I think he wouldn't be ready year one, but I think, man, under a year with some really good development, really good training, he could be a scary weapon down the line where I feel like he can mold into a first or second day NFL draft pick. Just given his athletic ability, his frame, and just kind of how he's already developed this much in his career. So he's going to be a fun one to watch as well.
When looking at the two big out-of-state names on this list that we've mentioned, Jaylen Brown and DeAndre Moore, I think they're in it with DeAndre Moore. I think they're in it really thick. I think they're going to probably be. I think you could probably say they're in the top 3 for DeAndre Moore at this point. And depending on how visits go and all those sorts of things, could make a move. They're on the outside a little bit for Jaylen Brown because he's never been to Austin. But if they do make the trip this next week, I think we could see him jump into the picture. I talked about this last year when I saw Jaylen. He talked a lot about wanting to go to an academic school. He's a very strong student, and he was mentioning Michigan and Notre Dame as schools that he was very much interested in at the time. I think Texas fits that kind of profile. I think that he's mentioned, Sarkisian's offense and the role Devontae Smith had in it, and he's a very Devontae Smith-like player. And I think that when you look at, him being from Miami, maybe he's not going to like the cold of Michigan and Notre Dame, but maybe Austin would be a good fit for him. Now, Miami's going to be really tough for him to get away from. They put a lot into him and keeping him home. They're going to be a major, major contender. But talking to his dad, he wants to get out and see the country and see every other school and see what's outside of South Florida. So I do think they can potentially make a move after this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting those out-of-state targets on campus as much as possible, building that relationship with them, and being able to have the advantage of Jaylen Brown having family in the Austin area. Just kind of work those advantages and see where it takes you. There's definitely nothing that can be lost in recruiting Jaylen Brown to the fullest extent.
Absolutely. So we'll kind of keep hammering those position previews week by week and see where things stand at the time. All right, Nick, before we get out of here, anything else you'd like to add?
No, that's about it. Getting ready to call some 6A basketball this weekend on Texan Live with our good friends at Dave Campbell's Texas Football. So I'm excited about that. Getting ready for that this weekend.
And I am going to see basketball games this weekend.
You've been at a basketball game almost every day, every time there's been one these past couple weeks, right?
No, I just went this week. Okay. I wanted to be at games. I had so much fun watching Devon Campbell play basketball this year that I was like, I should go to more high school basketball games. For one, they are a good place to go see recruits. It's less like work. It's more just hanging out and watching.
Yeah.
And so this week I'm going to go see Kimball play against Lufkin and go see Texas signee. Is he a signee? Arterio Morris?
Yeah.
Okay. Texas signee Arterio Morris and see if Chris Beard can finally land a shooter or a point guard who can pass the ball or just something.
Absolutely.
Something different. I went to a game, when was it? Tuesday night. I just went with our good friend Matt Stepp, who was going up the street to a gym near our houses, and to go see Richland and Mansfield Summit played. It was a really entertaining game, but it reminded me a lot of Texas basketball. There was a lot of dribbling for 20 seconds and then lobbing a contested three and bad passes and all that. So I'm interested to see Kimball because I know they've got some star power.
And looking around kind of at what's left in the state of Texas as far as, guys who are basketball or football targets. Let's see, this weekend, Duncanville, they're going to have Anthony Black, which Texas is kind of in the picture there, but they're more so on the outside looking in now. Oklahoma State, Arkansas, Gonzaga, those are the 3 schools doing a really good job recruiting him right now. He won't be in action, but he'll be on the sideline with his Duncanville team. 5-star power forward in the 2023 class, Ron Holland. Texas is doing a great job with him right now. He'll be in action for Duncanville. As well, in that same regional tournament, Garland has 5-star power forward Zubi Ejiofor, who signed to Kansas. He's really fun to watch. I think if Garland and Duncanville match up in that regional championship, it's going to be a ton of fun. And then looking around the state, you mentioned Arterio Morris. He's still in the picture. Beaumont United has a 4-star signee for Houston, Terrence Arsenault, who hit a game winner in triple overtime on Tuesday night to advance them to the regional tournament, which is fun. But he has a teammate, 5-star combo guard Wesley Yates, who Texas is going to do everything they can to try and pull in. He's been a ton of fun during the season and in this playoff run. Texas is going to battle Auburn, Alabama, and some others for him as well. And then looking at kind of football targets, Silsby is still in the picture because of newly offered 2024 athlete Draylon Miller, who has been just tearing it up and down the court. He's somebody that I could see potentially landing some basketball offers as his recruitment goes on. So that one might be interesting as it shakes out. But those are the ones to watch right now.
All right, we'll tune in on TexanLive.com to hear Nick call some basketball this weekend.
We'll be out here.
Should be fun. All right. Thank you to everybody who listens. Thank you to Taylor Estes I almost called her Taylor Swift. Taylor Estes for producing our podcast and making sure all we got to do is show up and hit the button. Thank you to Nick for joining me. I'm Mike Roach. We'll see you guys next week.